Welcome to Tuesday Sessions. And in honor of the most popular holiday in America, we have Terry Ingano from the Clinton Historical Society, who is going to talk about strange stories from the area. Terry also happens to be a favorite teacher of Heather Good's house, and was once superintendent of schools in Clinton. So one of the stories that Terry's going to be talking about is for all of you who get the newsletter and read the story about the murder in Bolton, and I write these columns. So it'll be interesting to hear what Terry has found out about that particular murder.
All right, why don't I get started? And if you can't hear me, I'm a former teacher, so maybe I would like to think you can hear me no matter what, but we'll thank you. All right. I am Terry Ingano from Clinton. I'm a retired teacher and superintendent of schools, and I spent 43 years in the Clinton Public Schools altogether. And I retired in 2017, and I'm glad of it. I highly recommend retirement to anyone. It's a great thing, it really is. And then in the meantime, I've been spent, I think it's about the same amount of time, 42, 43 years at the Clinton Historical Society as a volunteer, and that's where I am every Saturday morning and whatever. So you're probably the experts on Bolton history. Certainly I'm not. I decided to bring a few books just to show you what I've done, and we have a set of actually 4 books. These are for charity, and I write for the Item. Some of you might know that, and I write kind of weird, quirky type of stories. They're not the typical history stories. They're ones that you might not know about. So this was volume 1. It was quite a few years ago, maybe the mid-90s. And then we have, of course, volume 2. And then somehow during COVID, we came out with a volume 3. It seemed to be getting thinner and thinner. And then this is the newest one, volume 4, anyway. So not that you care that much about Clinton history, but I just want to maybe tell you a couple of quick Clinton stories before I go into what little I know about 3 Bolton stories, all right? First of all, are any of you from Clinton, like originally? We got 1, we got 2. All right, how about that? All right. I don't know how you can afford to live here, but I think, I swear they charge you to take 117 to go through town. I think they charge you. No, that's not true. But anyway, if you're from Clinton, you know the whole Irish connections and everything else. But this is a story from the new volume, and it's something that was picked up nationally across the country in newspapers. Actually, I think in some cases across the world. And it was this little tiny thing that appeared in the Clinton Daily Item. And it was one of the police logs. You know, those are so popular that everyone wants to know what's going on and who got arrested and all this stuff. And so this is probably very typical Clinton right here. This is from 1945. On complaint of John M. O'Toole, Officer Martin O'Toole arrested Mark O'Toole, who was booked by Officer Edward O'Toole and will be tried by Judge George O'Toole tomorrow morning. So anyway, this was written by an O'Malley, by the way. And Lowell Thomas, the famous radio and TV announcer, he picked up on this story. It was actually in Time magazine. That's, believe it or not, the Shah of Iran right there as a young man, but it was in that magazine, and it ended up going absolutely all over the world as, you know, the Clinton clan story is what it was called, anyway. And that is typical Clinton. My favorite, yes?
Were they all related?
Oh yes, probably, of course. In Clinton, in Clinton, we're all related somehow. I don't know. This was the first volume I wrote, and the first story of volume 1 has always been my favorite story. And it's a little gross, but I'm going to tell it to you anyway. And this is, again, typical Clinton. But believe it was 1923. And anyway, what happened is that a young girl, 16 years old, on Clark Street, ended up having a baby. And the parents were working in the mills or whatever. I don't know what happened to her or whatever, but she panicked. She didn't really know what to do. And with her 9-year-old brother, she basically delivered the baby herself. And they went out to the backyard and they dug a hole and they threw the baby in this sugar bag and covered it up. And somebody in the neighborhood, for whatever the reason, instead of running to the police or whatever, somebody wrote a letter to the police and basically said, if you dig up the backyard of this certain address on Clark Street in Clinton, you will find something like that. So this is back in the days when there were 2 mail deliveries per day. You won't find the postal union doing that anymore, that's for sure. But twice a day you would get mail. You'd get mail in the morning and you'd get mail in the afternoon. And whoever did this, whoever wrote that letter, put it in the neighborhood mailbox, the little mailbox, put it in there, and wouldn't you know, it got delivered at like 1:30 to the police station. Now all of this business in the backyard had happened at 9:30 that morning. So the police get it. There was always a lot of trouble in the north end of Clinton, always troublemakers and people fooling around and vandalism and goofing off and all that kid stuff mostly. But he didn't know what to do, the police chief, and so he said to one of his officers, let's go down to Clark Street and see what the heck this is all about. They had no idea, the letter wasn't signed. So they went down to Clark Street, there was nobody around at the time, and they started digging. And finally, at 4:30 in the afternoon, the shovel hits something. And they go through and they look, and they see this infant, you know, brand new, in this sugar bag, kind of covered in the sugar bag. And, you know, they went crazy. They called the medical examiner. They pick up this baby, and all of a sudden it starts to cry. And to make a long story even longer, the baby ended up being fine, delivered, ended up in the hospital for a little while. It was in the ground, covered completely by dirt in the ground from 9:30 in the morning to 4:30 in the afternoon, and still survived. I guess they said the reason being the sugar bag was kind of loose around it, so there was almost like a little bit of room for you know, it could breathe, but it was in the ground. And I followed that story, and by the time, this happened almost in the spring, and by the time I think September rolled around, for whatever the reason, they dropped all charges against the teenage girl. And I think the family moved out shortly after that, and nowadays, even when I go by the house, I think about that story and about, you know, that's pretty much a miracle, I guess I would say at this point. But I did not know that you would end up having the article on Bolton's unsolved murder. I thought I was being so unique and so great that you guys never even heard of this. You just read your newsletter. You already know probably more than I do about it. But anyway. And I have notes, believe me, I have to have notes. Usually I hide behind a projector or something, I'm down the back of a room, and it's great. But here I am now. This is, for all those years teaching, it's still, you know, intense. So anyway, it's true, very early on a Sunday morning, May 10, 1896, there was this William Coden, who was 53 years old, and he died in this spectacular fire, which we think was somewhere, I don't know, it was Ballville Road or somewhere on the hill, somewhere that way anyway. This huge fire. And remember, Bolton didn't have a fire department then. So, you know, other than neighbors throwing water on it, there was no way. If a house went up in flames, it went up in flames. You just try to get people out and you'd watch it burn. That was about it. So it was a spectacular fire. And this Cohen guy, it figures he was kind of an odd character. It figures he was from Clinton. But anyway, he lived on Chase Street in Clinton, which is not that far away from here. It's really right near Bolton Station. It ends at Bolton Station. And he must have been, he was a Civil War veteran who had been, had some kind of terrible wound. He was hit with a saber, I imagine in the head. And he was a little off most of the time. He was erratic behavior. He would, I think he was probably abusive to a wife and a daughter, and he was a terrible drinker. So he would, for whatever the reason, the wife left him probably in 1886. They moved to Connecticut, and then he ended up buying a house and 9 acres in Bolton. And again, I'm not sure exactly where, but I kind of thought it was not too far off Main Street, 117. So the last time he was seen was the Saturday night before. He was coming from Clinton. He was drunk again, and he had an argument with a neighbor, and most people kind of thought that he probably was, 3 sheets to the wind, or whatever they say, and probably lit himself on fire by accident or something like that, and the place went up, and that was the end. So the next morning, the police, the constable, not the police, the constable went through with some experts, and they went through all the ashes and everything. The roof had fallen in, the walls had fallen in, and into the cellar. And I don't know enough about old houses, but apparently his house, Mr. Cohen's house, had an open well in the cellar, and that's where he got his water. But there was no pump system or anything, so it, like when we see on TV or in the movies. So there was nothing in the kitchen where he could pump that water up. Whatever water he got, he'd have to go downstairs, and his well was right in the basement. So that's where they found what appeared to be a body, right there, but covered in brick, and the walls and the ceiling and everything else had just come in. So they weren't even sure. They assumed it was him. So anyway, what happened is, as they examined the thing, they found out that he was missing a head and arms and legs.
The body.
Yes, the body. The body was not whole, but people could see what they thought was the body, and it was what was left of it. But it took a long time back in those days to kind of find out what was really going on. So there was a stub of a body there, and because he walked around with some copper coins in his pocket all the time, I guess they realized, they knew it was Mr. Cohen. But again, they couldn't find most of the skull, and he was missing parts of arms and parts of legs. Now back then, and they quickly buried him. Martin Murphy, the funeral home, was very well known in Clinton. He came and got the body. He was buried at St. John's Cemetery on the Clinton-Lancaster line. But then starts all of these investigations. And nowadays they rope off things, they guard it, no one comes in and fools around with the. But back in those days, there were like 100 people. Every day, about 100 people gathered around the ashes. They poked through the ashes, looked around, everything else. And wasn't very, well kept, that area. So finally, doctors got involved, and they had to dig up the body from St. John's Cemetery. And that's when they, that they realized, they found out scientifically that something happened to the body. These limbs were cut off or whatever before the fire. And everybody had thought that maybe with bricks coming down and you'd lose your head or lose your arm. It wasn't that way at all. It took really till July and this happened in May, but it took to July for the doctors to say William Cohen was murdered. There was no doubt about that. And there were the Clapp people, the Clapp sisters, Lydia and Delia. They were questioned, and they apparently, I don't know enough about them, but they had apparently influenced this man to divorce his first wife. They egged him on to do that because I guess he had either he had promised to marry one of them. I don't know which one. And then what this story doesn't say is, for whatever the reason, Cohen, probably when he was drunk, he deeded half his house to one of the sisters, and he sold the other half of his house to the other sister. So he really got around. In the meantime, some lady from Patterson, New Jersey, showed up on the streets of Bolton and said, that man's my missing husband. He left me 3 years ago and whatever. Well, they found that was not true, because 3 years before he was still living in Bolton. So, I mean, people are coming out of the woodwork apparently over all of this. And the guy had money. I think they said his sister had left him a lot of money when she passed away. So he owned, like, whatever it was, 9 acres, and the house he had tried to fix up. But I don't know how these Clapp sisters were involved, and they certainly at first were major suspects in it. But anyway, things got even stranger in around late May, and I found this to be interesting. This is all in the old newspapers, the Clinton Current, that covered, of course, Bolton. Some gentleman was picking through the ashes. He was like a volunteer or something, and he picked through and he found a tooth, a charred tooth. And I think he went to the police about it, the constable about it, and the constable really didn't think it was a big deal, and kind of said, like, you know, that's fine, but, you know, that's not anything to do with the case, or it's not important. Well, it must have bothered this guy so much, his name was Clark, Robert Clark, that he wrote a letter to the editor in the newspaper and basically said that I found this tooth, and I found the tooth in the area where the police had already checked. And he was basically trying to say the constable, you know, didn't do a good job and really does shoddy work, and I found something that's really important. Well, that brought on another war of words, and about a week later in the Current, the constable wrote a letter to the editor of the Clinton Current that said, Mr. Clark made it sound like we didn't do our job, and yes, we did, and he basically said, I'm not even convinced that tooth was really found there. He thought that maybe Mr. Clark had actually put something in place just to get, you know, publicity or whatever. I don't know. So it sounds like a murder mystery all over the place anyway. But finally, around July 11th is when the official inquest was held. The complete testimony of every one of the people involved was written up in the newspaper. Everything they said was written up in the newspaper. This was big news back then. So finally in July, the headline said, Cohen was murdered. And it read, Cohen died of blows inflicted on his legs, arms, and head by person or persons unknown. Most of the skull and the upper and lower limbs have never been found. And I'll just read you this little editorial. Shortly after this, finally, and the murder has never been solved, somebody wrote this. I think they were from Bolton, and it appeared in the Current. How can a person who has committed such an act look himself in the face or face the countenances of his fellows? How can he go about his duties from day to day with the consciousness of that bloody stain upon his soul? How can a community endure the thought that such a being may be living, walking, talking in their midst, and yet remain undiscovered? If there is anyone within reach of these words who can furnish the district attorney with the merest shred of evidence bearing upon this crime, we appeal to him to come forward like a man and perform the duty which he owes himself, the community in which he lives, and the state which protects him and which will deal by him justly in his hour of need. We feel that this act, which has been committed within our borders, cannot and must not go unpunished. And that's the end of that story. It never was solved. I still would point the finger at the Clapp ladies and hopefully think that none of you are related. But so now let's get off the serious stuff. That's a little too serious. Anyway, Bolton In the 20s and 30s, Bolton was the home of the world's smartest dogs. There's a woman by the name of Scott, Mrs. Inez Scott, who supposedly had kennels, they said, on Route 117, wherever that is. I know it's right here, but I don't know whereabouts in Bolton. And she was a dog trainer and an award-winning dog trainer, but she had the first official talking dog in the United States, all right? When we say talking, we mean human words. She taught her dogs how to speak, and they could say, this is not, beg, roll over, sit down, whatever the heck they do. This is speaking human words, and maybe not perfectly, but you could tell what they were saying. So she had the kennels on 117, and again, she didn't train these dogs to be in a circus or to get money or anything like that. They were household pets that she would speak to and almost teach them that they could say the words back to her. So her first star was Sambo, and it was the first talking dog in the United States that was really studied seriously. And in the summer of 1927, dog experts from all over the country came to Bolton to see this Sambo in action. And in November of 1927, a full article on Sambo was published in a magazine called Youth's Companion. By that time, if you've ever seen old copies of Youth's Companion, they combined with a magazine called American Boy. And anyway, there was a full article all about Sambo in that magazine. And afterwards, this is funny because I'm a BU grad myself, but later on, Mrs. Scott brought Sambo to Boston University in this big auditorium where like 150 professors and students sat there and watched this dog talk, listened to this dog talk. And it really did talk. I'll tell you what it said. Now again, these were all things that it could say, and you would hear it and you would understand what it was saying. Like I'm saying, I want to go out. It would sound more like A-H, I want to go out. Or I want water. Or I want some more water. I want the traffic on Route 117 to, no. I want some more of that. I don't want. And no, and he would shake his head, no, but say no, and then yes, of course. And unfortunately, if I had a dog like that, I would probably want to make some money, but I wouldn't be letting it run around. But Sambo met its fate like a lot of dogs do. Cars were, it was 117, was that the M117, take your bet. But anyway, way back then, the dog was hit by a car and Sambo, later on, there was another dog called Mammy that she raised. These were all Cocker Spaniels. Mammy was the next talking dog. And he could say everything Sambo could say and then some more words. And this is pretty amazing stuff. I'm not a dog lover, but it's still pretty amazing that a dog can talk to you. And she would talk to it like a baby, and it would answer her. At 2 years old, the dog would say hello to any visitor who stopped by. Just say hello. It sounded just like hello. And Mammy's life ended the same way as Sambo's, fortunately. Again, 117, I bet. Anyway, in the fall of 1939, after this whole thing had kind of slowed down a little, there was a dog named Sandra that was raised by the same woman, Mrs. Scott, and that dog won Best in Show at a national competition in Madison, New Jersey. And I don't think that was a talking dog, but that was just, you've seen those Westminster dog shows and everything. One of the Bolton's dogs won the #1 dog in the United States. So pretty good stuff. So today, both Sambo and Mammy are buried in some kind of pet cemetery in Methuen, Mass. They have one gravestone with their names on both of them. So they're up in Methuen, Mass, and I have no idea where we planted Mrs. Scott. She should be around somewhere.
Do you think she was a ventriloquist?
No. I mean, supposedly all these, I never entertained 150 professors at BU. One at a time was enough for me, thank you. But no, I mean, these were experts who came. The professors were psychology and several other, you know, whatever. And the dogs could talk. And I guess if you train them well enough, and it's not something that happened overnight. She said it takes several years to get them to say a word, but pretty soon they can do it. And she was probably the only one around, anywhere around here, who could actually teach dogs how to talk. Pretty good. Finally, the last one. Do we have any Houghtons here? I hope I'm saying that right. H-O-U-G-H-T-O-N? Houghton?
We have a Barbara that's been amongst us, but she's not here today.
Oh, that's good. No, I mean, every town has a like a benefactor, and Bolton probably had many. Lancaster had like John Prescott. Clinton certainly had the Bigelow brothers, but in Bolton, the name Houghton, H-O-U-G-H-T-O-N, is a pretty big name. There's obviously the Houghton building over here, which was your first high school. I think there's a Houghton farm. Is that conservation land or something maybe? I don't know. There's a Houghton Farm Lane. I guess that's a new development maybe in town, something like that. So the name Houghton is a big deal. All right, and it's a big deal in Bolton anyway. I want to watch the time. This is my last story anyway. But and I certainly don't want to point nasty fingers at founders of your community or benefactors of your community. But this really caught my eye, what he did. You know, he lived in town and he died in around 1850. And when he died in 1850, he left a will and some kind of legal document that gifted the town of Bolton with I don't know how many acres, several acres of land, and $12,000, which in 1850 was huge money, to build a high school for Bolton. So that was your first Neshoba, I suppose. But, you know, it probably cost a hell of a lot less than your new one. I'm from Clinton, so sorry. I think, you know, there's no love lost between Clinton and Neshoba. So. But anyway, he left $12,000 to build a high school for Bolton kids. So this guy was well ahead of his time. Obviously, education was apparently very important to him. People like that didn't have money really in here, not around here. But so he was well ahead of his time. However, and this is not a big secret in Bolton, I don't think. I think I even saw a sign that has this information on it. But he actually listed in his will, or maybe it was the gift, the legal gift, for this school, which by the way they named after him, the Houghton School, which is now over here, town offices, used to be the police station, right? That was your first high school. He actually listed the names of 9 Bolton families whose children and their descendants were not allowed to enroll in the school. So apparently he's one guy that you just didn't want to, pardon my French, piss off. I mean, obviously, you didn't argue with Mr. Houghton, that's for sure. But think of the problems, and it created a major problem for the town of Bolton. This is a public school. They named after its benefactor. $12,000 was big bucks. The school was built. They had to start maybe 25 students, but they were kids right here in this town from 9 different families that he said they can't come. And ultimately, their children can't go to this school. So needless to say, I think it was a Bolton family who was probably restricted from coming that brought this all the way to the Massachusetts Supreme Court. And the court decided that his the restriction on that will could not be, it's not legal. And, I mean, think about, you guys pay taxes, all right? Think about, you pay taxes for a new school, but certain members of your family can't go to that school. You just can't go. So that was the biggest problem. You're paying for a school, but maybe you had children or grandchildren that couldn't go there. And so that was the biggest problem. And so he was not the type of guy that you argue with anyway, that's for sure. And it created a big legal mess for this town once that all came about. But I did see it on a sign recently, so it's not like it's a big secret, but that's pretty weird. A lot of benefactors of other communities, the Bigelows, for instance, in Clinton, I do believe at times they were protecting their own interest. Everybody in Clinton talks about the Bigelows, and they gave us this and they gave us that. Yes, they did, but they started our fire department. But if you look at it from another point of view, they owned most of the buildings in town. They own the most expensive buildings. So in a way, it would behoove them to have a fire department to protect their own buildings, right? And the Clinton Savings Bank they started, but they wanted their employees to start saving money, to be educated. They started the library. Why? They wanted an educated workforce. So maybe, certainly the Bigelows might have been taking care of their own needs a little bit too, but not as blatant as your own Mr. Houghton, that's for sure, okay? And by the way, we have at the Holder Memorial, we actually have one of the desks from that school. And it's funny because when I read this, I did not know that, right? There's this little desk with the inkwell and the whole thing that we have in an upper room at the Historical Society, and there's no tag or anything on it, and I found out, thanks to this little program today, that's where it came from. It's from the Houghton School. Now I have a story to tell about it.
Isn't the phrase controlling from the grave what he was doing?
I mean, yes, I think so. I mean, you just don't hear of things like that. You really don't. That was a little unusual.
Do you know why he didn't want those 9 names to come?
I think the newspaper was very kind. It's funny because old newspapers weren't always kind to people. If you were caught drunk, they'd just say, Joe Schmo is drunk again, and he, whatever. But in that case, they said he was a man of strong likes and dislikes, which maybe is a nice way to say, don't argue with him because he's going to make you pay for it sometime. I don't know. So, any questions or anything? I thank you for the invitation. I'm the president of the Clinton Rotary Club, and we have lunch in 20 minutes. And I've got to pull out on 117, so there's my 20 minutes right there, probably. Especially if you want to take a left. So anyway, thank you again for your